The market smelled of blood and smoke. Metal cages stood in a long line under the dim lights, each cage holding a weak figure, skinny arms wrapped around trembling knees, heads lowered in shame. The crowd shouted, laughed, and pointed fingers. They did not see living beings, they only saw weight and price. The auctioneer called out numbers like a butcher, not like a seller of life, weighed by the kilo. The alien auctioneer barked, his four eyes glowing red as he slammed a stick against the iron bars. Fresh meat, tender bones. Who will take this one? 10 credits a kilo. Inside one cage, a girl pressed herself against the corner, her thin frame shaking, her silver eyes staring out through the bars. She had been dragged here from some forgotten village, treated like an animal, weighed like a cut of meat. The crowd roared with ugly hunger. Some licked their lips, some raised their hands to bid. They did not even ask her name. They only asked her weight. The auctioneer pulled her roughly to the front, lifting her as if she was no more than a sack of grain. 35 kilos, he announced with pride. You pay for 35 and you get 35 of the finest meat. The crowd cheered. Coins clinked. Voices rose higher. The girl closed her eyes, waiting for the end. But in the back of the crowd, a different figure stood. He was not like the others, he was taller. His skin pale, his eyes deep and human. He wore simple clothes, worn boots, and a heavy coat that looked older than the town itself. While others shouted, he remained silent. While others drooled for meat, his gaze rested quietly on the girl in the cage. The auctioneer sneered, scanning the crowd. 40 credits a kilo! Who will take her? Don't waste her youth, she is fresh and soft. Hands rose, aliens shouted higher numbers, the price grew louder. But still, the human did not move. The girl noticed him, just for a moment, through her tears. She saw his calm face. She saw no hunger in his eyes, only something else, something strange. Pity. The auctioneer slammed the stick again. 50 credits a kilo, do I hear more? The human raised his hand only once, quiet but steady. The crowd turned in shock, whispers spread like fire. A human? Why would he buy meat? They say humans eat their own kind. Maybe he's mad. The auctioneer froze, then grinned, his teeth sharp and yellow. Ah, the lonely human wants her, does he? 50 credits a kilo. Going once, going twice. The crowd jeered, some laughed, some spat. They thought the human was insane. But his hand did not fall, his eyes did not. Look away from the girl, sold. The auctioneer bellowed. The meat belongs to the human. The cage door creaked open, chains rattled as the girl was shoved forward. She stumbled and nearly fell. The crowd reached out with greedy hands. Some tried to touch her skin before. She was taken away, but the human stepped forward. His shadow long, his presence strong. He caught her before she hit the ground, his hand firm but gentle. He pulled her close as if shielding her from the staring eyes. The girl trembled harder, confusion storming inside her mind. Why was she still alive? Why did this stranger hold her like something precious instead of a slab of meat? The auctioneer laughed, tossing the coins into a dirty bag. She's yours. Now, human, do as you please. Eat her whole or cut her slow makes no difference to me. The human said nothing, his jaw tight, his silence louder than any insult. He wrapped his coat around the girl, covering her fragile body, and led her away from the market, the laughter of the crowd following behind them like a storm of knives. Step by step, the girl realized something strange. She was not being dragged like cattle. She was being guided, protected. Her heart pounded, fear mixed with a fragile spark of hope. The alien crowd shouted after them, "You can't save her, she's meat." But the human did not look back. He only whispered low, words meant for her alone. "You are not meat," he said. "You are coming home with me." And in that moment, the nightmare of the auction block began to crack. For the first time, the girl felt a small light inside her chest. It was weak, but it was hope, and hope was more dangerous than chains. The road back from the market was quiet. The girl walked slowly beside the human, her chains still clinking around her wrists, her bare feet dragging across the cold dirt. She kept waiting for the trick. She thought he would stop at the butcher's stall or throw her into a cooking pit. That was what always happened when someone bought meat. But step after step, the man said nothing. only guiding her through the dusty streets until the noise of the market faded. The houses grew fewer, the air grew cleaner, and soon they reached the edge of the colony, where a small wooden home stood alone beneath the gray sky. The girl looked at it with wide eyes. She had never seen a home that was not guarded, not locked, not built like a cage. The human opened the door and nodded for her to enter. Her thin legs trembled. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled different here, not of smoke and blood, but of bread, old books, and firewood. The room was small but warm. A table stood in the center, shelves lined with tools and jars. A blanket, folded neatly on a chair. The girl stood still, not daring to move. The human placed his bag down, then looked at her, his eyes calm, his voice steady. "You are safe here," he said. She flinched at the words. Safe was a sound she had never heard before. He took a key and unlocked her chains, letting them fall heavy to the floor. Her arms shook, the skin raw where the metal had rubbed. She rubbed her wrists in disbelief. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why don't you cut me?" The human sighed, pulling out a chair. He sat down heavily like a man who had carried sorrow too long. "Because you are not meat," he said. "You are alive." The girl blinked fast, confusion and fear clashing inside her chest. No one had ever said such words, no one had ever looked at her as if she mattered. The human stood and went to the small stove. Soon the smell of warm food filled the room. He placed a bowl in front of her, steam rising, the scent rich and comforting. She stared at it suspiciously, her hands hovering but not moving, she thought. It was a trick poisoned to kill her slowly. "Eat," he said gently. "It's yours." Her stomach growled. Hunger battled with fear. Finally, she picked up the spoon with shaking fingers and took one bite. It was warm. It was soft. It was real food meant for her. Tears burned her eyes. She ate faster, as if someone might take it away. The human said nothing, just sat quietly, watching her eat. When the bowl was empty, she leaned back, trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. He looked at the fire, his eyes shadowed. "Because I know what it is like to be alone," he said. The words hung heavy in the small room. The girl tilted her head, confused. "Alone?" He nodded, pulling a small frame from the shelf. It held a picture, old and worn, of a woman and a child smiling. "They are gone," he said quietly. "I have no one now." The girl's chest ached as she looked at the picture. For the first time she saw not a buyer, not a master, but a man broken by his own losses. Silence filled the room, heavy but not cruel. Outside the wind howled, and far away the market's laughter echoed faintly. But in this house, there was only quiet. The girl looked down at her thin hands, still trembling. "If I stay, they will come for me," she whispered. "They will take me back." The human's eyes hardened, his jaw tight. "They will not take you," he said. "Not while I live." She stared at him, shocked by the promise. No one had ever spoken. For her, no one had ever said such words. Her throat tightened, fear mixed with something new. Trust. She pulled the blanket from the chair and wrapped it around herself, the warmth sinking deep, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. The human left her the bed and sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. As sleep pulled her down, she thought of the auction block, the red eyes of the auctioneer, the cruel laughter of the crowd, the stink of blood and smoke. And then she thought of this room, of warm food, of kind eyes, of a voice that said, "You are safe here." For the first time in her life, she slept without chains. But as she slept, the colony whispered. Neighbors gossiping about the strange human who had taken a meat girl into his home. Suspicion was rising and danger was coming closer. The human knew this peace could not last, but for tonight, he let her rest. For tonight, the lonely buyer had given her a taste of life. The morning light crept through the cracks of the wooden shutters. The girl stirred beneath the blanket, her body still sore from chains, her mind still haunted by the memory of the cages. For a moment, she thought she was still in the market, Thought she would wake to the sound of the auctioneer's cruel voice, but instead, she heard the soft clatter of dishes and the low hiss of fire. She sat up slowly, her eyes darting across the room. The human was at the stove, moving with quiet focus, his hands steady as he cooked. The smell of food filled the air again, stronger now, richer, the kind of smell that had never reached her cage. Her stomach twisted painfully with hunger, but fear kept her still. The human turned, his eyes meeting hers. He gave a small nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. She blinked, confused. By the words, no one had ever greeted her like that. No one had ever spoken as if she was more than a number on a scale. He placed a plate on the table, bread warm and soft, soup steaming gently. She did not move. She hugged the blanket tighter, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Come," he said, his tone gentle. "It's for you." Her lips trembled, her voice faint. "Why do you feed me?" He did not answer with long speeches, only said, "Because you are hungry." The simplicity of the words struck her harder than any chain. Slowly, she rose from the bed, her bare feet pressing against the wooden floor. She walked to the table and sat, her hand shaking. The human pushed the bowl toward her, then sat across, not touching his own food until she touched hers. She lifted the spoon, her hand trembling so much that soup spilled, but she managed to take a bite. The warmth filled her mouth, sliding down her throat, and for the first time in years, she tasted kindness. Tears blurred her vision. She tried to hide them, but her shoulders shook. She ate again, faster now, fear that someone might take it away clawing at her chest. The human said nothing, letting her eat, his eyes steady but soft. When the bowl was empty, she gasped quietly, her thin chest rising and falling. She whispered, "You could sell me back. You could earn more coins." He shook his head, his voice low. "Coins mean nothing to me." Her brows furrowed. She had never heard such a thing. In the market, every breath had a price. Every weight was counted. Every life was sold. "Then why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why keep me?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "Because I will not see another life wasted." The girl's hands clutched the edge of the table, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of laughter and cages still wrapped. Around her, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, he stood, taking her bowl and washing it, his movements simple, ordinary, as if nothing he did was strange, as if this was normal life, but to her it was everything. She sat frozen, trying to understand, trying to breathe through the storm of disbelief and fragile hope. When he returned, he placed a small cup of water before her. "Drink," he said. She obeyed, the cool water washing down the last traces of fear from her throat. After a long moment, she whispered, "I do not even know your name." The human gave a small smile, tired but kind. "My name is Daniel," he said. The name sounded strange to her ears, but she held on to it, repeating it in her mind. Daniel. The one who fed her, Daniel, the one who bought her not to eat but to save. He looked at her. "And yours?" She froze, her lips parting, then closing again. She had not spoken her name in years. In the cages they had stripped it away, replaced it with numbers, replaced it with weight. Her voice cracked. "I don't remember if I'm allowed to have one." Daniel's eyes softened. "Then you will remember it here," he said. "Not as meat, not as weight, but as you." Her throat tightened, a sob nearly escaping, but she held it back. The firelight flickered across her face, showing the shadows of scars and hunger, but also the first fragile glow of something new. Outside, footsteps passed the house, muffled voices whispered, the neighbors still talking, still suspicious. Daniel glanced at the window, his jaw tight. He knew they were being watched. He knew the colony would not stay silent about his choice, but he returned his gaze to the girl, steady and unshaken. "You are safe here," he repeated, his voice firm. The words sank deeper than before, wrapping around her like the blanket she held. For the first time in her life, she ate a meal not as property, not as livestock but as a person, and in that moment, sitting at a small wooden table, she felt a fragile seed of trust take root. But far beyond the walls of the little house, the market had not forgotten, the auctioneer had not forgotten, and the colony whispered louder with every passing hour. The girl did not yet know that this first meal was only the beginning of a battle between what she had been told she was and what Daniel believed she could become. The night came heavy, clouds covering the pale moon. Inside the small wooden home, the fire still glowed faintly, its light casting soft shadows across the walls. The girl sat near the flames, wrapped in the blanket, her silver eyes fixed on Daniel, who sat across from her sharpening an old knife on a stone. She watched him carefully, every scrape of metal making her flinch, old fear whispering in her mind. Fear that he would turn on her, fear that kindness was only a mask. Daniel noticed her trembling. He stopped sharpening and set the blade aside, his voice steady. "You don't have to fear me," he said. "Not in this house." The girl lowered her gaze, her voice low. "Fear never leaves," she whispered. "It grows. In the cages, it eats us before they do." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger flickering in his eyes, not at her but at the world that had reduced her to this. Slowly he rose and walked to the shelf, taking down a small box. He opened it and pulled out a piece of cloth, soft and clean. He handed it to her. "For the scars," he said simply. Her fingers brushed the cloth, her chest heavy. No one had ever cared if she healed. No one had ever offered her anything but chains. She pressed it gently against her wrist where the metal had bitten deep, and for the first time she let herself believe his kindness was not a trick. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of fragile trust. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the fire. "I lost my family years ago," he said quietly. "My wife, my son, both gone in a sickness the doctors couldn't cure." The girl looked at him, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Since then," he continued, "this house has been nothing but walls, no laughter, no voices, only me." Her throat tightened. She saw his loneliness like a shadow around him, heavy and endless. "You remind me," he said, glancing at her, "that life still matters, even when the world tries to weigh it and sell it away." Her eyes widened, her hands clutching the blanket tighter. She had never been told she mattered, never. But before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the door. Both froze. Daniel's hand instinctively reached for the knife, his eyes narrowing. The girl's breath caught, terror flooding back into her chest. "They came," she whispered. "The market came for me." The knock came again, louder, followed by a rough voice. "Open the door, human colony patrol." Daniel rose slowly, his face set like stone. He motioned for her to stay quiet, to stay hidden. He opened the door just enough to see outside. 2 soldiers stood in the night, armored and armed, their eyes cold. "What do you want?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but firm. The taller soldier sneered. "We heard you bought one of the meat girls whole, not for the table but for your house." Daniel's jaw flexed. "She is mine," he said flatly. "I paid." The soldier smirked. "Yours, yes, but property stays property. The market says no meat should live past the block. Give her back or face the law." Behind him, the girl pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding, every word stabbing. Her deeper, Daniel stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "She is not meat," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "She stays with me." The soldiers exchanged a glance. One laughed. "You think you can change the rules? You think a lonely human can rewrite the laws of trade?" Daniel didn't blink, didn't flinch. "I don't care about your laws," he said. "This house is mine, and in my house, she is safe." The soldier's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "Be careful, human. The market does not forget, it does not forgive." They turned and walked away, their armor clanking in the dark, their voices low as they disappeared into the night. Daniel closed the door slowly, locking it, his hand resting against the wood, his back heavy with tension. The girl stared at him, her chest tight. Why risk this for me?" she whispered. They will punish you. They will punish both of us. Daniel turned, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet fire. Because you are not property, he said. And because no one deserves to live in fear of being carved. Apart, her breath caught, her eyes shining with tears she could no longer hold back. She dropped the blanket and stepped closer, her small hands trembling as they gripped his arm. Then I will trust you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Even if the fear follows me, even if the world hates me, I will trust you. Daniel looked down at her, and for the first time in years he felt something stir inside him, something beyond loneliness, beyond grief. The bond of trust, fragile but unbroken, had been forged between them. Outside, the colony whispered louder, rumors spreading through the night, the market sharpening its knives. But inside the small wooden home, a promise had been made. A human would stand between her and the world, and she would no longer face it alone. The next morning the colony was restless. Voices echoed through the narrow streets, whispers spreading like fire. The story of the human who had taken a meat girl into his home was on every tongue. Some laughed, calling Daniel a fool. Some cursed, saying he broke the order of trade, and others spoke with fear, warning that the market would not forgive such defiance. Inside his small house, Daniel sat at the table, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The girl sat opposite, the blanket around her shoulders, her silver eyes darting nervously toward the window, where shadows of passers-by flickered. Why do they talk so loud? She whispered, her voice trembling. Because they don't understand, Daniel said, his tone steady. They only see what the market tells them to see. She hugged the blanket tighter. Then they will come. They always come. He leaned forward, his eyes firm. And I will face them. But even as he spoke, heavy boots marched outside, the sound of many feet approaching. Daniel rose and stepped to the door, opening it before the banging could begin. A group of merchants stood there, their robes bright, their faces sharp, and behind them stood two guards from the colony patrol. The lead merchant sneered, his thin lips curling. Human, you insult our trade, you insult the law. Return the girl to the market or pay the price. Daniel stood tall in the doorway, his broad frame blocking the view inside. I paid, he said firmly. She is mine. The merchant spat. Yours, yes, but not to keep alive. The law is clear. Meat cannot live past the block. She is not meat, Daniel snapped, his voice rising. She is a person, and she stays here. The guards shifted, their hands brushing the hilts of their weapons, tension thick in the air. The girl pressed herself against the wall inside, her breath sharp, her fear heavy. The merchant's eyes narrowed. Do you think your kind will protect you? You are one human against the market, against the colony, against the law. Daniel's face hardened, his voice low but sharp as steel. I don't need protection from them. I will protect her myself. The merchant's smile faded, replaced with cold fury. Then you make yourself an enemy, human, and the market does not forget enemies. With a sharp gesture, the merchants turned and left, the guards following, but their voices carried down the street, loud enough for all to hear. The human defies the market. The human keeps meat in his home. Doors cracked open, eyes peered out, whispers grew louder. Daniel closed the door, locking it tight, his shoulders heavy. The girl rushed to him, her eyes wide with terror. Why did you say that? Now they will hurt you. They will hurt us both. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his voice calm. Because it had to be said. Because if I stay silent, they will own you forever. Her breath shook, her silver eyes glistening. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, he said softly. But you are not alone anymore. She clung to his arm, her body trembling. Yet for the first time, her fear was shared, no longer carried alone. That night, the air outside buzzed with tension. Torches flickered. As merchants gathered at the edges of the colony, their whispers sharp as knives. Inside, Daniel prepared, checking his supplies, sharpening tools, storing food, his movements calm but focused. The girl watched him, her chest heavy. You will fight them all? She asked. If I must, he answered simply. But I would rather escape before the noose tightens. Escape? She repeated, her voice a mix of hope and fear. He nodded. There are places beyond the colony, places where the market holds. No chains. If we reach them, you can live free. Her heart raced, the thought of freedom too large to hold, too strange to believe, but the fire in his voice made it real. She whispered, No one ever tried to free us. Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. Then I will be the first. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and in the distance the market's drums began to beat, slow and heavy, a warning that they were coming. The girl pressed the blanket tighter, her silver eyes on Daniel, and in that moment, though fear clung to her, she believed in him. The colony might turn against them. The market might sharpen its knives, but she was no longer meat weighed by the kilo. She was someone worth fighting for, and Daniel had already chosen to fight. The night grew colder and the wind carried whispers of danger through the colony. Daniel stood by the window watching the streets, shadows moving like hunters waiting for their prey. The girl sat by the fire, clutching the blanket, her silver eyes wide. They will come, won't they? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, they will come, he said. That is why we cannot stay. Her heart jumped, fear and hope colliding. Leave? Where will we go? To the free worlds, Daniel answered, his eyes steady. Places where no auctioneer dares to weigh life by the kilo. Places where you can walk without chains. She shook her head, her voice breaking. I have never known such places. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then I will show you. He pulled an old bag from the shelf and began filling it with food, water, and tools. Each movement careful, practiced, as though he had been preparing for this night long. Before, the girl watched him silently, confusion heavy in her chest. Why risk everything? She whispered. You could live quietly if you gave me back. Daniel paused, turning toward her, his eyes fierce. Quiet is not living, not if it means letting cruelty rule. I lost my family once. I will not lose you to the knives of the market. Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes. She lowered her head, unable to speak. The firelight flickered across the room, painting them both in shades of orange and shadow. Suddenly, a distant drumbeat echoed across the colony. Slow, deep, relentless, the sound of the market's hunters calling to each other. The girl shivered, her hands gripping the blanket until her knuckles turned white. They are coming already. Daniel moved quickly, handing her a small cloak, rough but warm. Put this on, he said. Keep your head low, stay close to me. Her fingers trembled as she obeyed, the fabric covering her fragile frame. Daniel slung the bag over his shoulder, then opened a hidden hatch beneath the floorboards. The wood creaked softly as he lifted it, revealing a narrow passage leading into the earth. The girl's eyes widened. You had a tunnel? He gave a small nod. A man alone learns to prepare in case the world turns against him. They climbed down, the dark earth closing around them. Daniel closed the hatch above, leaving only silence and the faint glow of a lantern he carried. The tunnel was narrow, damp, the air heavy with soil, their footsteps soft but urgent. The girl stayed close, her small hand gripping his coat as though letting go would mean being swallowed by the dark. Every sound made her jump. Every echo felt like footsteps behind them. Daniel spoke softly, his voice a steady anchor. Breathe. You are safe as long as you stay with me. At last, the tunnel opened into the edge of the forest beyond the colony walls, tall black trees swaying under the night wind. The girl lifted her hood, silver eyes glinting. So this is freedom? She whispered. Daniel's face was firm. Not yet, but we are closer. They began to move through the trees, the ground soft with fallen leaves, the forest alive with distant sounds. Behind them, faint torches lit the colony walls, hunters searching. Dogs barking in the distance. The girl froze, panic rising, but Daniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder. We keep moving, he said. Fear cannot guide us, only steps forward. Hours passed as they traveled deeper. the girl stumbling often but Daniel never letting her fall. At dawn, they stopped near a stream, the first light of the sun breaking through the branches. The girl knelt, drinking water with shaking hands, her face pale. They will chase us forever, won't they? Daniel crouched beside her, his voice calm. Yes, maybe, but every step we take makes it harder for them. Every day we stay free makes their chains weaker. She looked at him, her lips trembling. And if they catch us? He met her gaze, his voice sharp with resolve. Then they will have to go through me first. Her chest ached. The weight of his promise pressing deep, she whispered. I don't deserve this. You deserve life, he said, his hand steady, on her shoulder, nothing less. In the distance, the howl of hounds cut through the morning. Closer than before, the girl's heart raced. She gripped his arm, terror filling her. They found us. Daniel stood, his eyes scanning the forest, his jaw set. Then we keep moving, he said. Run when I say, hide when I say, and trust me. The girl nodded, fear shaking her but trust holding her feet. Together they stepped deeper into the wild, chased by the echoes of the market, carried by the fragile hope of escape. The forest stretched on for days. Daniel and the girl moved through shadow and light, through hunger and cold, never staying in one place long enough for the hunters to catch them. At night, they slept under trees, the fire hidden, the stars watching, from above. At dawn they rose and walked again, her small steps quickened by fear, his steady stride guided by determination. Each time the girl stumbled, Daniel lifted her. Each time she cried in silence, he whispered, You are not alone. Still the hunters chased them, their horns echoing through the woods, their hounds howling, the sound of chains rattling in the distance. The girl's chest burned with fear. They will never stop, she whispered. They will chase me until the end. Daniel's eyes hardened. Then we will go further than they can follow, he said. There is a border beyond the mountains, a place where the market has no power. Hope flickered in her heart, faint but real. They pushed on, climbing rocky slopes, crossing rivers cold enough to freeze their skin, hunger gnawing at their stomachs, exhaustion pulling at their bones. Yet through it all, Daniel never faltered. And because he never faltered, she found the strength to keep moving. At last, one night, they reached the high cliffs, the land spreading, wide below them, lights glowing in the distance, not the red glare of the market, but soft golden beams from free towns. The girl gasped, her silver eyes wide. Is that? Yes, Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with relief. That is freedom. But before they could descend, the howl of hounds split the air behind them, closer than ever, torches flickering through the trees below. The girl's heart raced. They are here! Daniel pulled her behind a rock, his knife in his hand, his jaw set. Stay low, he ordered. No matter what happens, you keep moving toward those lights. Tears blurred her vision. They will kill you, she whispered. He shook his head, fierce resolve burning in his eyes. They will not take you, not while I breathe. The hunters climbed the slope, their shadows stretching against the cliffs, their voices sharp. Daniel stepped forward, his figure strong against the torchlight. The girl trembled behind him, clutching the cloak to her chest. Give her back, the lead merchant shouted, his face twisted with rage. She is market property. Daniel raised his voice, loud enough for the mountains to carry. She is not property. She is not meat. She is life, and you will not have her. The hunters snarled, their weapons drawn, but in that moment the girl felt something rise inside her, something fierce. She stepped beside Daniel, her small body trembling but her voice steady. I am not meat, she said, her words echoing like a spark in the dark. The hunters hesitated, shocked by her defiance, and in that pause, Daniel acted, throwing dust from his pouch into the torches. The flames sputtered and died, darkness crashing down around them. Run, he shouted, grabbing her hand. They ran down the rocky path, the hunters stumbling in the dark, the hounds howling but blinded by the sudden smoke. Down and down they ran, the lights of the free towns growing closer, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. At last they crossed the final stream, the water rushing around their ankles, and stepped onto soil no market guard could claim. The girl collapsed to her knees, tears streaming, her chest heaving. "We made it," she whispered. "We are free." Daniel knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his own breath ragged, but his eyes shining with something he had not felt in years. Peace. Villagers from the free town came forward, their faces kind, their hands reaching to help. No chains, no cages, no cruel laughter. The girl looked at them with disbelief. "They do not fear me," she whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "Because here you are not meat, you are not weight, you are not property, here you are alive." She sobbed into his coat, her thin arms wrapping around him. "You gave me life," she whispered. "You gave me hope." Daniel held her close, his voice low but steady. "And you gave me purpose again." The lights of the free town warmed them as dawn broke, the nightmare of the auction block now behind them. For the first time, the girl felt the chains inside her heart begin to break, replaced by the fragile but unshakable truth. She belonged not to the market, not to fear, but to herself. And beside her stood the human who had refused to let her be sold, the man who had turned loneliness into protection, sorrow into courage. Daniel and the girl stepped into the free town together, leaving behind the world that weighed life by the kilo. And in the quiet of the morning, their story began again, not as meat, not as property, but as family,